Welcome back everyone. For those of you who are new to the channel, I'm Vishnu and today I'll be covering the first part in our series on cardiovascular physiology. So let's start with the basics. Now the heart has two sides, the left and the right side, and they each have different jobs. The left side works with the systemic circulation, which includes arteries, capillaries, and veins throughout the entire body, and it pumps blood to all the organs except the lungs. Now, on the other hand, the right side works with the pulmonary circulation, which involves the blood vessels in the lungs, and that pumps blood to the lungs. The left and the right sides work one right after the other, and it creates a cycle. The blood is pumped from the left heart to the systemic circulation, then to the right heart, then to the pulmonary circulation, and then back to the left heart. The rate at which blood is pumped from either side is called the cardiac output. Since the left and right sides work in series, the cardiac outputs are actually equal. The rate at which blood returns to the heart from the veins is called venous return. In a steady state, the venous return to the left heart equals the venous return to the right heart, so it should make sense that the cardiac output from the heart equals the venous return back to the heart. So now let's go over the circuitry of the heart using this diagram. So let's start with the left heart. The left ventricle is filled with oxygenated blood that comes directly from the lungs through the pulmonary vein. This blood moves from the left atrium to the left ventricle through the mitral valve. Now, the left ventricle pumps blood into the aorta, which exits the left ventricle through the aortic valve. And that is located between the ventricle and the aorta, as shown here. When the left ventricle contracts, the aortic valve opens and blood is forcefully pumped into the aorta, which contributes to the cardiac output. The cardiac output is then distributed to different organs through parallel arteries. Note that this is not in series, that all of these organs are actually in parallel with one another. Approximately 15% goes to the brain, 5% goes to the heart, 25% goes to the kidneys, and so on. The total systemic blood flow actually equals the cardiac output. Organs release the venous blood containing waste products like carbon dioxide, and this blood collected in the veins flows back to the right heart through the vena cava. The right atrium is filled with venous return from the vena cava due to higher pressures. In normal conditions, venous return to the right atrium equals the cardiac output from the left ventricle. The right ventricle is filled with mixed venous blood flowing through the tricuspid valve from the right atrium. The right ventricle pumps blood into the pulmonary artery through the pulmonic valve, similar to the left ventricle's action over here. The blood then travels to the lungs where oxygen is added and carbon dioxide is removed. Oxygenated blood returns to the heart via the pulmonary vein, entering the left atrium to start a brand new cycle. Now, blood vessels are like highways that carry blood from the heart to different body tissues and back to the heart. The size and characteristics of blood vessels impact their resistance and capacitance. So let's start with the arteries. The aorta is the largest artery and it delivers oxygenated blood to the organs. Arteries have thick walls with elastic tissue, smooth muscle, and connective tissue. Arteries receive blood directly from the heart under high pressure, and the blood volume in them is then called the stressed volume. Next, the arterioles are small branches of arteries with tonically active smooth muscle. There are sympathetic nerves that influence the arterioles. For example, alpha-1 receptors cause constriction, which increases the resistance, while beta-2 receptors cause dilation, decreasing the resistance. Arterioles are the highest resistance site in the vasculature, and their diameter can be adjusted by sympathetic activity and other substances. Capillaries are thin-walled structures where exchanges between blood and tissues occur. They have a single layer of endothelial cells surrounded by a basal lamina. Nutrients, gases, and solutes cross the capillary wall, with lipid-soluble substances diffusing through endothelial cell membranes. Capillaries are not always filled with blood, and the perfusion depends on the metabolic needs of tissues, regulated by arterioles and precapillary sphincters. Next, venules are thin-walled, leading to veins, which have less elastic tissue and more capacitance. Veins contain the largest percent of blood in the cardiovascular system, and their volume is called the unstressed volume. Sympathetic nerve activity via alpha-1 receptors can cause vein contraction, reducing capacitance and the unstressed volume. Now let's talk about blood flow mechanics. The velocity of blood flow is how fast the blood moves per unit time. Blood vessels in the cardiovascular system differ in diameter and cross-sectional area, affecting the velocity of flow. The relationship between velocity, flow, and cross-sectional area is expressed by this equation: velocity equals flow divided by area. So as you can see by this equation, there's an inverse relationship between the velocity and total cross-sectional area. The total blood flow at each vessel level, such as the aorta, the arteries, and the capillaries, equals the cardiac output. Due to the inverse relationship between velocity and total area, the velocity is highest in the aorta and lowest in the capillaries. It's highest in the aorta because there's actually a smaller cross-sectional area compared to the other vessels. In the capillaries, it actually has the lowest velocity because of the largest total cross-sectional area. And finally, in between them are the arteries. They have moderate velocity with a larger cross-sectional area than the aorta. Low velocity in the capillaries is actually pretty beneficial for their function in nutrient, solute, and water exchange, and it maximizes the time available for these processes. Now, blood flow through the blood vessels is influenced by two factors: the pressure difference between the inlet and outlet of the vessel, and the resistance of the vessel to blood flow. This relationship is similar to Ohm's law in electrical circuits, where V equals IR. Blood flow corresponds to current flow, pressure differences corresponds to voltage, and resistance is corresponding to electrical resistance. Similarly, the blood flow equation is expressed as Q equals delta P over R, where Q represents the flow, delta P is the pressure difference, and R is the resistance. The magnitude of blood flow is directly proportional to the pressure difference and inversely proportional to resistance. Blood always flows from areas of higher to lower pressure. For instance, during ventricular ejection, blood flows from the left ventricle to the aorta due to the higher pressure in the ventricle. Conversely, blood flows from the vena cava to the right atrium because of the slightly higher pressure in the vena cava. Resistance can be calculated using the rearranged formula R equals delta P over Q. So changes in blood vessel resistance, particularly in arterioles, are a major mechanism for altering blood flow in the cardiovascular system. The relationship can also be used to measure total peripheral resistance by substituting cardiac output for flow and the pressure difference between the aorta and vena cava for delta P. Additionally, it can determine the resistance of a single organ by substituting organ blood flow for flow and the pressure difference between the organ's artery and vein for delta P. That's all I have today, so if you guys enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment if you have any questions or feedback. We would love to hear what you guys have to say, and stay tuned for next week where we'll dive into cardiac electrophysiology. Thank you.